Before today's topic, a quick disclaimer. The stories and data we share come from the states that we practice in and the experiences we personally had, which can differ greatly across our country and certainly the globe. This is not a professional advice show, so get comfy and let's discuss death.
Hello, and welcome to MortMic, a down-to-earth discussion on death and dying. I'm Jem.
And I'm Red, and we are your quandary-quashing quizmasters on this week's episode. After our first Curiosidays episode, where we were asking our parents to send us their death-related questions, we thought it'd be only fair to milk our friends for their inquiries as well. You guys are constantly DMing us on Facebook to answer weird stuff all the time. It was only a matter of time to open the floor to a public forum for these questions. So we got a lot of really good ones for this episode, a lot of teeth-based ones for some reason. What is it with y'all and teeth? So, so strap in and we'll dig into some of these questions.
I'm excited. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but a lot of the episodes we've been doing specifically in the last couple of months have been pre-recorded, way in advance, because me and Red have been going through a lot of life stuff recently. I myself am graduating from grad school. Yay.
Woo!
And I am going to be an official forensics pathologist assistant.
Ooh, that's so exciting, Jem.
Yeah. And I literally just agreed to take a job down in the southern part of the United States of America. So there's a big move coming up there. Unfortunately, this is at the same time when Red is moving back to where I'm at right now.
So we'll get one whole month together, after all this time. We were oh man, we're finally gonna get to record in person together once.
Once, maybe, not even,
right.
Because we're we've been so busy moving and stuff. So yeah, so Red is coming back to where we first met together and hung out, and I am moving down south ways. So that's what we've been up to recently. But we're excited to finally have some time to devote to the podcast and try some new things. You guys know we had our first guest interview recently, and we're looking to do more of that kind of stuff. We have a website now at mortmicpodcast.com. And it's really beautiful. I spent a lot of time on it.
Yeah,
so
you did.
Please go appreciate it. I spent a lot of time on it instead of studying or whatever. So. But definitely check that out. Our new private website, mortmicpodcast.com. It has a bunch of cool stuff on there. But yeah, let's definitely get into it. Answer some of these really cool questions that our ridiculous friends asked us.
I thought I'd start with one of my favorite ridiculous questions. Actually, this is kind of what started me wanting to do the friend episode. Was a buddy James of mine had asked this to me, and I'm like, okay, well, we definitely have to do episodes for friend stuff, because you guys, our parents are pretty laid back about their questions in a regard, but you guys, no holds barred. You just ask it, the weirdest stuff. So, James asks, and this is exactly verbatim as it was sent to me. Random question: when a body is cremated, do breast augmentations need to be removed before the body is burned? I swear I didn't kill anyone. So this one was really fun, because I had an idea of the answer to this already, but I also asked my crematory operators just in case, because I have heard a few different things on this. They'll tell you in crematory operator class, no, they have to be removed before cremation because this, that, and the other thing. But it's really not necessary. The big reasons are the gel implants can melt and get stuck to the floor, the brick floor of the retort, which takes some scraping to get off, but that's really not a big deal. It's just a blob that you can just scrape off and dispose of as medical waste. Or I mean, if it's a saline implant, it'll just pop, apparently. So
yeah, and evaporate, definitely. Yeah, I mean, breast implants are either saline or silicone is the gel type. So obviously the silicone isn't gonna burn, it's just gonna melt and then solidify and get gross. But yeah, saline's just going to evaporate up. I will say that during autopsy, it's something you have to look out for, because when you make the Y incision over the chest, if you do not realize that the person has breast implants, and it's pretty easy to tell, but sometimes you're just working so fast you don't realize, you can just slice right through it, and all of a sudden you're covered in like silicone or like saline solution. Never happened to me because I'm very good at my job, but it's definitely something that you have to be aware of.
Man, I would never even like thought about that. That would be fun to have to like replicate for on the mortician side of things.
Yeah. And then we don't take them out at all. We definitely just leave them in place. So don't worry, no one's going to be like stealing your breast implants when you die or whatever. Yeah.
Also, it's like an extremely like invasive, I shouldn't say extremely, but pretty invasive medical procedure. Like to like the job of the like person embalming somebody is not to like go in and take those out. Like it just, we want to make as like few holes in the body as possible, like essentially after somebody dies, like least invasive as possible. So for somebody to do that, like it's not really appropriate.
Right. Moving on to a couple of questions that my dear friend Holly asked. They are an avid listener to the show, but they are also a wonderful, amazing person, and I very much appreciate them. So they ask a couple of questions. Let's start with, what was a situation that occurred during your work that you still think about from time to time? Red, did you want to start with that one?
Sure. So this is actually kind of messed up. A messed up story of mine. It's like, yeah, it sticks with me for like a bad reason. Cause it's like, sometimes when you have like your first traumas on the job of like how fragile our job is and how much bad stuff can go wrong. Like, and it's really bad when like an accident happens at work, like that stuff, like that's the I'm awake at 3 a.m. my brain won't let me sleep kind of story. So there was a person who had pretty severe like physical disabilities who passed away very young, and we were taking care of them, and I had set them up to be embalmed and then had to run upstairs for a morning meeting. And the morning meeting was over, and we're just chit-chatting before I go down and embalm. And the maintenance guy comes up and says, "Is there a reason that that poor person is on the floor?" And like, no. The color just drains out of your face. And, like, you know, like this high-pitched sound like happened in my brain. And like, yeah, because their body was so contorted just naturally, after I had blocked them on the table, it like must have just slipped and like rolled right off the table onto the ground.
It just fell on its own, like when no one was there.
Yeah, exactly.
Creepy.
Yeah, so like that, it was all bad. Like not how I wanted to start the morning. Like had to do minor like reconstruction on part of their face because of it.
Yeah.
You know, and that's one of the things, like you'd feel bad. You don't want to bring that up to the family because like that's not going to help at all. That's not going to help their grief at all to know that. You know, and like I still feel bad about it to this day. Like it haunts me for real, that poor person.
And I could answer this question as well, but I'm just gonna move on to the next question because it kind of like rolls into this here. So Holly asks, "What is the weirdest cause of death you've come across?" And I will start by saying I get asked this question all the time, literally all the time, and I think about it a lot. And the unfortunate answer is that I don't have like a number one go-to answer for this question. I see a lot of weird stuff, guys. And I think the problem for me is that it's hard for me to gauge like what story are you as a listener prepared to hear? Do I tell you about the time that some guy jumped off a roof and his spine like shot through his skull?
What?
Do I tell you about the time that this little dog like ate this lady's toes and skin off her leg? It wasn't the cause of death, but it's just like a weird, gross story that people like to hear sometimes. And you know, like there's so much stuff that I could tell. There was this decedent got struck by a train and his whole entire body was completely mangled except for this perfect little whole kidney that was sitting just neatly in between the tracks. Like weird stuff like that, you know? So I honestly, I love Holly, but I do not like this question because it's really difficult for me to gauge like what kind of, so if you ever ask anyone this question, just give them a little bit to go on. Like, weirdest gory like story, or like weirdest funny story, or like weirdest sad story. So that's my answer to that question. Sorry, I got a little philosophical there.
Honestly, I feel like that's a good answer to that question, though, because I feel it the same way, where it's just like,
Yeah.
I don't know, weird to me, like weird to what aspect?
Yeah.
Because there are so many weirds. Like weird for me could even mean like the person who had the most drugs in their system when they died, and that's what caused it, you know, like it's all sorts. It takes all kinds.
Yeah, definitely. Moving on, though. So we have another red question. What is the strangest request from a family member?
So I know that we told this one on another podcast, and then like after I told it, I could have sworn I told it on our podcast, and Gemma's like, "What? Like what even?" to this story.
we were interviewing on The Radical Humanist. It's a podcast that you guys should check out or interview if you want to. But Red just starts telling the story, and I was like, I have never heard this before.
So I was like younger. I was like an apprentice or whatever. So I wasn't super used to like weird requests just yet. Like it was like, oh, can we put these things in their casket to display? You know, like it was stuff like that. Like not always common, but like that was out of the ordinary for me. Until this biker family was like, okay, so we brought in this like V-cut, super super low shirt because she always liked showing off her cleavage. Like that was really like important to her. It was an important part of her like appearance. But obviously gravity does what it does when you are on your back. So in order to like recreate the cleavage, we didn't know this like until after she had been embalmed. So like her breasts weren't like hardened into like they weren't firmed up on top of her chest. So we had to take a suture and like sew her nipples together to like pull them together to make the cleavage so they could see her cleavage again.
Wow. I mean, you got to do what you got to do, honestly.
It's movie magic.
You got to get those girls up there. It is magic. Wow, I love it. That's just like that reminds me of like a TV show kind of thing.
It really is.
You did that in real life. And then Holly's last question here, is there a best state to die in, such as because of laws, environmental effects, etc.?
Oh, I was thinking more like solid, liquid, gas. I would probably say solid would be the boo. I guess from like my weird aspects of things, like I like from a person's perspective, like that lost somebody, and like in specific of like what I want to do for my family members. I feel like especially if you wanted to like cremation with scattering, like living in places near like large bodies of water or like forest dense areas are nice because you have like a lot more places you could go to scatter without super far travel. And then maybe like from the funeral directing aspect or whatever, like Florida cremates super fast. Like I don't know what their laws are down there that allow them to like turn around a cremation as quickly as they do, but like it's so much faster than we can do here. So like that's kind of nice.
Listen, Red, I think we both know that Florida has no laws.
There
Absolutely
no
no laws. There are no laws in Florida. Honestly, whenever like you hear about like a funeral director like getting in trouble or you know doing something like that is causing them like legal problems, they go to Florida.
Yeah,
like that's what they do. Anyways, not to bash Florida or whatever, but
no, we're bashing Florida. Let's be real.
I was reading Red's notes on this, and it's funny they put like you know near large bodies of water or forest dense areas, and in my mind, like as a forensic person, I was like, you absolutely do not want to die in a large body of water or near forest dense areas where no one will ever find your corpse. So I'm just gonna say opposite of what Red says. Die in like a place with like a lot of nice hospitals and hospice care or something like this.
That's actually a really good point. maybe mine are better for like murderers, not so much the people.
Yeah, and that honestly tracks, you know.
So Richard goes on to ask, how long does it take for brain activity to cease in the case of death, either natural or sudden, unexpected trauma-related deaths?
This is a question that I have not researched. So anything I say right now is off the top of my head and is certainly not scientific fact. But I think it really depends on what is happening in terms of like trauma related. If there is any like severing of the spinal cord or any of the midbrain structures, like your brain stem or your medulla oblongata, my favorite brain word, it's pretty instantaneous. I would also say that, I mean, if you're unconscious, there's no way you're going to know that you're dying. If there's like a lack of oxygen and your brain isn't getting any oxygen, I feel like that's a pretty quick brain death. But, you know, I'm pretty sure there is research on, you know, the brain and how long it stays active after death. I don't know about this research at all, but yeah, that's my answer.
I definitely think, I mean, like, our consciousness as we know it ceases pretty quickly, whereas like there might still be firing of neurons happening as long as there's oxygen still being like used up in the body. But I can't imagine that would like affect any type of like conscious or like actual interaction with you as a person, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I've heard that's where like near death experiences come from, like people that have hallucinations of like heaven or like an afterlife sort of thing. I've heard that kind of goes hand in hand with like your brain going into like overdrive because they're like your brain is dying and it's kind of like going crazy. So I've heard that's like a thing, but other than that, I'm not so sure.
We'll definitely touch a little bit more on that in then a few questions from now. I'm excited to answer that one, actually. Another friend of mine, Harleen, asks, is death care the same as hospice?
I would say no. I feel like death care is a term that encompasses a lot of things. Like my job is death care, Red's job is death care. I feel like death care happens at the point of being postmortem. So everything after death, I would say, is death care. Hospice is more palliative care, which means that you are in the process of actively dying and you are like just getting comfort care in order to make your exit like a better
rolling out the red carpet for death.
Thank you. I was like, what's the word? But that's great. Yeah. So palliative care is more like taking care of you so you're more comfortable in your own death. And that's hospice. Obviously, hospice nurses deal with a lot of death and they interact with a lot of death care professionals, but I would not consider hospice death care.
Catherine asks, do corpses stay intact longer in modern coffins as compared to older wooden box top type coffins of the past? So this is a good one. There are a lot of factors involved in preservation of deceased. And so like when you see like the joke of like, oh, the funeral director is selling you the gasketed casket, this, that, and it's hermetically sealed, etc., etc. You know, it doesn't necessarily stay intact longer because there's still like bacterial like processes going on, and you have created like this tiny environment for everything to still happen inside of. Honestly, the only thing that keeps people like intact, quote unquote, longer is going to be embalming. Like a lot of times when you see people pulled out during disinterments that still look pretty all right, it's most likely going to be because of embalming. Really the biggest thing is just keeping groundwater out. That's the bigger thing. So like hermetically sealing it is just creating its own little biome to still have someone decompose.
Yeah, and it also has a lot to do with like the vault that your casket goes in, because these days rarely, if ever, are caskets just placed into the ground.
Truth.
A lot of cemeteries require vaults, which are these huge concrete boxes that the casket goes into. So obviously, and caskets are made out of like metal, aluminum, whatever. So obviously it's going to last a little bit longer as opposed to like an old like, you know, coffin that they just threw in the ground or whatever.
Right, exactly. Those corpses would definitely, I guess, like the TLDR of that. Yes, people stay intact longer with modern coffins, but not as long as you might think, I suppose. Everyone's still going to decompose, but it's the embalming that counts more so.
Yeah. I know we have to move quickly through these questions, but all of these questions are so good. I just want to spend so much time on them. I feel like they're all good, like intros to their own episode, but we got to keep the the time flowing, so let's keep going.
They also go on to ask, when someone is cremated, how are ashes collected? This one's super easy. There are a few metal tools that are used to retrieve the ashes and the bone fragments out of the retort, because retorts are super long, obviously, to fit in like an entire human body. Rakes and sweepers are like on these long metal poles, and that just pushes or pulls them forward into like a collection bin that's at the front of the retort where the door is, and that funnels it all down into a container that processes that you can take then to process in the cremulator pulverizer.
Next question from same person. Is it true that the body is flooded with DMT at the time of death?
So yes, this one I'm very excited about. I'm not going to get too far into it just because I do want to talk about this in another episode. So like I expected this answer to be super short and sweet, and I was super wrong. Every time I like answer a question, I always research it, even if I'm sure I know the answer, because I like to avoid making an ass of myself to like the one scientist out there that's listening and knows more about me about a niche study. So this is one of those.
Definitely leave that to me. I can be the person that doesn't research any of their questions.
So I was always under the assumption that DMT was like the leading cause of near-death experiences and like that light we go towards. But this is propagated from a single study done on lab mice. So while we do produce DMT naturally, and definitely more so at the time of death, it's not in any like substantial amount to cause that tripping, as it were. Many other brain chemicals are produced actually at the same time, and like that whole cocktail is more likely the cause of what's that euphoria we experience at the end of life. There are lots of conflicting studies on this topic, and there's still a lot more research to do, but I'm definitely holding this for another episode where we can go way more in depth about.
Yeah, that would be great. I think the general consensus is that your brain is going into like final survival, like fight to the death literally mode, so things just start going haywire. But yeah, I've never heard of that, honestly, so I don't think there is any like scientific like fact to that question.
Another question they asked is, how does one become a mortician? And we definitely had a few episodes that we talked about this, so my short answer to this is a lot of bad life choices.
Yeah. All right, moving on. No, just kidding. Yeah, I think that a lot of our earlier episodes, we talked about this a bunch. Maybe we'll do like a recap, come back to it sort of thing. But there's a lot of resources out there. Basically, just go Google, and we'll tell you about it later.
Their last question is, with the population of the planet getting so large, are there any issues or has there been any forethought to how we will have room to bury people indefinitely?
So basically, will we eventually run out of space?
So this one's interesting, and it's definitely something I've personally thought about before. And it's kind of hard to put like numbers and figures to this. So we're going to be talking like pretty conceptually about this. If we continue to have 50-ish% burial rate in the United States, we will like definitely run out of cemetery space eventually, of course. It's easy for us to think with like all the barren available land in the United States, like we'll never have the issue of space for the dead, but not all land is made like equally in this situation. Like it can't always be used for burial. Like if soil is too loose or like the groundwater is too high.
Yeah, I think that, like Red said, eventually, yes, like in the future, we are going to run out of space. But there is, a lot of things that people are doing in other smaller countries and overcrowded metro areas. I think we might have all heard about like stories in, Asian metropolitan areas where the space is so valuable, everyone is crammed into a cemetery. Cremation is becoming more popular in order to accommodate this. There are also instances I know of where there's like a limit. I don't want to say a limit, but there's a time frame to which you can like bury a body deeper and put someone else on top.
Yeah, you're like it's like renting. You're getting a mortgage on a, on
Yeah.
a grave.
It sounds really weird, but I mean, we're talking like hundreds of years. Like, we're not talking about 20 years. So like, grandma's not going to be reburied deeper and some rando put on top of grandma. So don't worry about that. So this is definitely something that is in the works as well.
I mean, even when you see old cemeteries, like the super small ones in the country or like in the center of cities by churchyards and stuff, like they're usually already full or they're reserved for like a very select few. I've seen a lot like of cemeteries by me expanding their like workable and sellable land for grave spaces, and a lot are putting in mausoleums to capitalize on like vertical space instead. So I feel like with the trend towards cremation that gets higher and higher every year, this will be a lot less of a problem in the future.
Next, we have Iami asking, if someone's last wishes contradict a family's wishes, which takes priority for a corpse? I think we talked about this briefly before, but we have like a bunch of things to say about this, but I will say that unfortunately, if you do not have any literal like legal documentation in place, the next of kin is usually the authority on all things involving your death care.
And yeah, honestly, even if like they contradict yours, a lot of states don't protect any wills or anything. So like they can, you can even prearrange and pay for something and the family can still come in and say, no, we're not doing that. Like a lot of states don't protect like last wishes in that respect because you were considered quasi property as a corpse.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. So even if your will is like, I want to be cremated and spread in, so-and-so ocean. If your family doesn't want to do that, they don't have to. This is why me and Red are always recommending that if you have conflicting interests and ideas, then your family, who would be your next of kin, so either your mom or your dad or your siblings, fill out paperwork to have a, what is it called?
Funeral representative.
Funeral representative to have it be someone that you trust who is going to fulfill your wishes as you want them to be fulfilled. This is legal documentation, and this person can take care of you and your wishes. Other than that, you really don't have any rights as a dead person.
Vince asks, what are some things people have requested done to a body before a viewing that you can just not realistically, ethically, or legally do?
I've never had this experience, but this question is really scary to me.
Actually, I have also never experienced something that someone said and like I was like, I actually can't do that. Like I've had moments come up that I'm like, this seems pretty legally gray, and then it usually ends up falling back onto, well, is the funeral home going to put their license on the line to like handle this? Like I remember there was like a family that wanted to drive the casket to the cemetery in the back of their pickup, and I'm like, I mean, there's really nothing illegal about it as long as like it's in procession and like we're going with them, but it's there's a lot of gray area with what we do. Another question from Ryan: where do you stand on a move away from traditional burial funeral practices and towards more non-traditional ones?
We love it. We're all for it. Me and Red both.
10 out of 10.
10 out of 10 would recommend. I think that traditional burial is a old, archaic, terrible, wasteful practice, and I really hate it. I think it's just awful. I think it's so wasteful. It's so bad for the environment, and I think it's stupid because you're dead, and you don't need all of these chemicals pumped into your body. You don't need that metal casket and like what did you say? The hydronically sealed vault or whatever. Hermetically sealed to get all the water out. It doesn't matter because in the end you're going to decompose and turn into dust, and that's all that matters. So I definitely do enjoy it. I love the idea of like natural burials, anything that is, unique and individualized to the individual to like honor their memory, I think is really important. We had a couple episodes talking about alternative ideas for cremains, alternative burials. One of my favorites is like cryogenics, like cryogenically frozen. It's silly, but I think it's really cool that like people are, investing into something like that. So I would say all for it. You know, honestly, one of my dreams is to own like an alternative funeral home in the future, maybe like a retirement gig, but we are definitely all for it here on this podcast.
Logan asks, is there any solid answer as to what burst of electrical activity and sudden weight loss upon death is?
I love this question. I like the first time I heard about this. Okay, so let me back up. We're talking about the 21 gram experiment. So in 1907, Duncan McDougall hosted an experiment where he wanted to see if the soul of a person has any weight. So he literally took dying, like actively dying people. This was, again, back in 1907, so you could do stuff like this. He took actively dying people and put them on body scales, and he monitored them. And at the moment of death, he like watched the weight of the person to see if anything changed. I think he said that his pool of test subjects was like, I think it was almost 10 people. So not a lot, but not like one person.
Yeah.
So it was a couple people. And he said across the board, like uniformly, there was a 21 gram weight loss at the exact moment of death, which is very interesting. And I just love it. I just think it's so weird. It's so cool. So that is what you are talking about. Obviously, there hasn't been any way to replicate this study. And even if there has been, I don't think there's been any like concrete, like peer-reviewed people like saying that this is like actually true. But it is a really interesting experiment, and if you have the chance to read about it, definitely go Google that, because I think it's so cool. It's called the 21 gram experiment. So, you know, maybe your soul weighs 21 grams. And then what you're asking about the electrical activity, we kind of talked about earlier. But more recently, the University of Michigan did an experiment on rats that they noticed increased brain activity before the moment of death. Like we talked about, your brain just kind of goes haywire. This could lead to like visual sensations, but obviously control experiments have not been performed on humans because it is not 1907 anymore. So definitely definitely some interesting stuff there. But the 21 gram experiment thing is super cool, and I recommend anyone go read about it.
That's super fascinating. I did not know about that.
I love it. So my friend Marcus is asking us a very well-worded, educated question. He states, my question is, with the decrease of Americans who identify as part of one of the Abrahamic religions, and with 64% of millennials stating that they attend a religious service less than 3 times per year, do you feel that funeral practices and the preparation of the body will change over the next decade? If you have already started to observe this trend, how so? It seems to me that much of our funeral traditions are rooted in Abrahamic religious practices.
I love the question. So I absolutely think that funeral services are going to be completely revamped in 10 years. Because like it all starts with who's coming in to make the arrangements. And like today, right now, it's mostly our parents, Gen X, and boomers, like those age groups. They're more traditional, but with Gen X, it's starting to make that verge towards the DIY modus, like the do-it-yourself. So like, for example, instead of a funeral home performing the cremation and arranging and directing a memorial service and funeral, the families are just contracting with us to do the cremation itself. And then the families will schedule services on their own. And we've seen this trend even in our lifetime. So directors like I've worked with that have been in the business for like maybe like 15, like 30 years, like and somewhere in that, like they used to never do contracts for cremation. And now it's up to like 60% in most places. So like a lot of people aren't really seeing value in funerals run at funeral homes or at churches, and they're more going towards like memorial luncheons and celebrations of life and things that like talk about the detail of who a person was and that impact they made while they were here, not so much the scripture aspect. So the other portion of your question, like preparations of bodies is definitely changing too. We're seeing a lot less embalming, especially because there's a lot more direct services. So direct cremation, direct burial, and it's not legally required to embalm a body if you're just choosing a direct service. So like Whether we'll see a change towards more alternative forms of disposition, it's yet to be seen in large trends. Like even things like natural burial and like open fire cremation, body composting, things like that are being done, but new laws come out every year to allow or poo-poo on these practices. So honestly, those only account for even like 1% of dispositions that we have right now. It all depends on availability, the price, the practice. I mean, and if the Catholic Church will lobby against it, usually determines those things coming to be on the forefront of funeral service. So I hope that got all your parts of your question.
Yeah, I am honestly excited for when the Gen Z starts to have their funeral arrangements going on. Like that's gonna be wild. I love Gen Z. They're crazy.
Yeah, the first funeral I do I want my body shot out of a cannon, like
fireworks.
Yeah,
which is a thing. But moving on.
Joy asks, have you ever found stuff on bodies after the viewing, like things in their pockets or shirt or such?
I mean, I think this is more, I mean, obviously after the viewing, I see the bodies like when you die, like I see when you die. I think obviously we get, drugs, we get whatever is on you at the moment of death. But I think the funniest thing that I still think about from time to time is I used to work in a morgue that was located within a hospital. And so we would get the hospital deaths as well. And the one time this hospital bed came down, and usually the decedents come down already bagged in body bags. And so you saw this huge hump like coming out of the body bag. And we were like, oh my gosh, is that person like really big? Like what's going on? And the transporter was like, oh no, that's just all our stuff. And so it was this like little old lady who, like, bless her heart, like had moved into the hospital.
Oh my God.
So she had like her iPad, she had like her knitting stuff, her like quilting stuff. She had like all of these things that were just like had been, put in a personal belongings bag and put inside of her body bag with her. But it was just so funny. It was like all of her like personal items from like her life were just with her, and they were bigger than her. So that was really funny.
The Mary Poppins bag.
Yeah.
I typically see like a lot of like there's like cute things like people put in like goodbye letters and like family photos, and then it definitely feels like our own version of like Egyptian like burial, where it's just like you put the things that the person like loved in their lifetime. So I see a lot of like beer cans and like packs of cigarettes and candy. I've had to pull bullets out of the casket before. You can't get like, I don't care if
you
they were a
can't
hunter.
cremate them.
You can't cremate them. Pat goes on to ask, is it true that before cremation, teeth with metal fillings have to be removed? And what do you do with them if so?
No. If any metal is left over after a cremation, it's magnetically like sifted, physically picked out manually and recycled. So people think that the idea here is that people are stealing like the gold fillings out of your teeth. First of all, teeth fillings aren't gold anymore. Sure, people who are dying still have gold in their mouth, but honestly, it's literally just like cents worth of gold. Like there is no huge black market for like dead people gold fillings that funeral directors are like dipping their toes into.
You could find more change in your couch. Like
yeah. And honestly, funeral directors are not dentists. I think that I've met a lot of funeral directors who don't like teeth or like anything like that. So I really don't think there's anyone out there trying to steal grandma's gold fillings or anything like this anymore.
Pat also asks, do you get asked for pieces of the deceased? I assume hair mostly, but anything bizarre. Hair is like super common to be asked for, like that it's not out of the ordinary. I think the weirdest ones for me have been like families have asked me, not families, like plural, have asked for dentures back after they've been closed in the mouth for the viewing.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah,
You
disgusting.
gotta open it back up.
So gross. And then like medical implants have been asked for pacemakers back, hip replacement, like neck cages, like. If even someone asked me for fingernails one time, like I am not joking. You did like that was one person, and that one person was. I hope they're okay.
I was gonna say that's like some black magic stuff going on,
right?
Probably. I feel like, Yeah, I mean, again, different experience. Can you give them pacemakers? I feel like, is that allowed?
I did have one family that we had to give it back for like an investigation because they needed like the
Yeah.
information on the pacemaker to help determine something. Like they were doing a private investigation or something
Oh,
about
I
the
see, I
death.
see.
So that we
Yeah.
did. We disinfected it and gave that one back.
I will say that, this isn't in the same vein, but kind of. So, what I thought was really interesting is that if you say you lose a part of yourself, like you have an amputation or whatever, and if it's in your beliefs that you need to be buried as a whole person, we've had multiple people come to the morgue and be like, hey, can I have my arm back, please?
Mm.
And I mean, we have to give it to you. A lot of hospitals have policies that any human biohazard waste, which would be your like amputated arm, has to be released to a funeral director who then would, probably cremate it because there's no way that arm is staying fresh until the day you die. So,
Yeah, sorry, you don't get to put it in a jar on your, mantle
yeah,
or anything.
no like formalin jar going on. But yes, that is something that actually happens quite often. Megan is asking us, have you ever been sprayed when aspirating?
So it's not usually in my experience, it's not usually yourself that you have to worry about getting sprayed by your own aspiration. It's like when you're working with other people, because typically, like if you can tell like the aspirator's starting to back up, like you'll cover it like from spraying yourself. But I've had a lot of people panic and pull it out, protecting themselves and then spraying everybody else around them.
Ew.
Yeah. I think my favorite story about this is I was assisting another student during their like MortSci embalming final, and their hose backed up. So when they went to pull it out, it shot spray everywhere. And the professors that were sitting across the room, like droplet spray landed like just a few
Oh
feet
my
away
gosh.
from them. And like I would be so scared for his grade because if it ruined their loafers, like, oh my gosh, that's enough.
Yeah. I will definitely say that there is a big difference here between embalmers and autopsy techs, or like people performing autopsies. So, Red, maybe you can correct me, but usually embalmers are not gowned up to the degree that autopsy people are.
Confirmed.
So if you're doing an autopsy, you're wearing like, a plastic apron with sleeves, you're wearing a face shield, you're wearing goggles, you're wearing a mask, you're wearing a hairnet, you're wearing booties, you're wearing it all because you have to. If you are an embalmer, you're probably wearing gloves. I'm just kidding. You're definitely wearing gloves. But sometimes, maybe that's all you get to put on before you start embalming. So I will say that getting sprayed at autopsy is definitely a high risk for the job, but I mean, we are prepared to handle that. So, getting sprayed by like a kidney cyst or, whatever have you, it sucks, but usually it's not as bad as like, I would say, an aspirating spray.
Christina asks us, I saw a TikTok where the family didn't like their grandmother's lipstick, and when they tried to wipe it off, wiped off her actual lips, all in caps there. Is that something that's actually possible?
Yes. So Christina asked me this question, and as soon as I read it, I like burst out laughing because it is possible.
Mm-hmm.
This is true, and I cannot believe this was on TikTok. Like, what the heck? So Red, why don't you explain why this is totally possible?
So, in the case that the person that embalmed this family's loved one, they wax the lips. They would do that to like build them up, to shape them better, or whatever have you. That would absolutely come off with a wipe. I've done this when I've tried to fiddle fart around with another embalmer's stuff. I'm like, oh man, they did this lip line wrong, and then I screw up the whole mouth because it's not even lips; it's just wax at that point. And this is why you never, ever touch the deceased makeup. Like, if you don't like something about your loved one's appearance, always ask the funeral director to come fix it because, like, there's a lot of magic that goes on to make people look the way they do sometimes. And you have no idea what type of building we've done to get them to look that way.
Another tooth question. Marlon asks us, do teeth really pop inside the crematorium?
Jesus Christ, no. I definitely saw this like meme fake did you know facts like going around on like Facebook and like the internet and stuff. And the answer is definitely no. No, no, no.
There's nothing inside the tooth that would actually like pressurize or like pop. Like there's not corn inside of your teeth. I don't really know. I don't really know what the idea is here, but and thank goodness, because I do not think that we'd keep a lot of crematory operators for very long if this was consistently happening.
Yeah, honestly.
The poor crematory operators. Have you ever met a crematory operator? They are like salt of the earth, like wholesome people that I don't even know why they're in death care. This is true for all crematory operators, by the way. They're usually just like people. Like, I don't know how they get the job, but they definitely would not be sticking around if there was some like flashbang popping happening every single like decedent cremation.
It's already like traumatic enough if a pacemaker doesn't get removed and they have to get that exploded there. Like, absolutely not. Teeth do not pop in cremation.
Kerrigan asks, what do I have to do to be mummified?
So this is another one that I'm super glad that I Googled first. I was yet again ready to say, absolutely not. Nope, no funeral home is going to scramble your brain through your nose. And an airfare to Egypt is super expensive. But there is a straight up organization called Sumum, and they're based out of Utah, that actually practices modern mummification. And apparently you can have services like normal, like you would the quote-unquote traditional American funeral, and they will then take your body afterwards and begin the mummification process like ye olde times. Mm-hmm. And it apparently takes like 90 days, which I think is pretty fast compared to what they might have done back in the day. But it's also going to cost you 67,000 American dollar dues. Like that is a lot of money. That's like 10 funerals, dude. Like,
yeah, that's like comparable to cryogenics, though. I'm just gonna throw it out there.
Very true.
Comparable.
That's true.
But yeah, the fact that this process is possible is funny. But like, if there's a will, there's a way. Like, people are weirdos. I get it. Like, go ahead and mummify yourself. My first thought about this question when Kerrigan asked it, I said directly to her, I was like, well, you need to die outside in like New Mexico and you'll be mummified in like a couple hours. Which is true. Mummification is a natural process that happens in a very dry heat environment. So like I said, outside in the summer in New Mexico, have yourself your own little mummification party.
I thought we would end this episode on one of my favorite questions that was asked. Thank you, Devin, for this gem. Devin asks, is death a cool person?
Aw, I like to say that me and Death have a really good relationship. I do love me some Death, so I would say he's an all right guy, or she, or they.
Based on everything that we've seen from our pop culture analyses of like media, etc., I'm gonna say that's a hard yes. Death probably wears some pretty cool clothes and speaks in riddles or something, and I'm all about that.
Well, thank you everyone for your questions today. I think we covered a lot. We covered a lot of ground. We learned a lot of things. I hope you guys got some cool, fun party facts that you can bring to your friends that are tired of hearing you talk about death. But this was really fun. I think it's a long time coming. We wanted to do like a really fun, like easy episode. Like I said, there's a lot of stuff going on, so we really appreciate you guys, and I hope it was fun for you too.
I'm really excited to do more episodes like this in the future, because I was assuming, our friends are going to ask us a lot of the same questions our parents did, but no, you guys did not. So I am looking forward to more episodes in the future with more rowdy questions, some weird stuff, things that we probably don't even think about asking anymore. So this will be definitely a staple episode type in the future.
Yeah, our friends are some weirdos. I love it.
And that's all this week for MortMic. We'd love to connect with you guys on our socials, so like, follow, and subscribe to us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at MortMic Podcast. It would mean a lot to hear your feedback, so please tell us what you think in a comment, drop us a rating on whatever podcast hosting site you use. And if you have any suggestions on topics or like to hear your own weird question be talked about, shoot us an email at mortmicpodcast@gmail.com.
I also want to give a huge thank you to our friend Marcin for the use of his song titled Deputies of Death, which he produced just for our show. You can check out his Bandcamp at marcinmusic.bandcamp.com. Thanks, Marcin.
And be sure to tune in the first Thursday of every month for some more casual discussions on death. Thanks, guys, so much for listening. This has been MortMic.
Bye.
Bye.